I never imagined that the quiet click of a pen could end a war. Not a real war, of course, but the kind that tears families apart and leaves landscapes more devastated than any battlefield. Mine was an $800,000 war. Though the number itself was simply a symbol, a placeholder for greed, entitlement, and the kind of bitterness that festers in people who believe they deserve more than they earned. The moment came on a Thursday morning, the kind of day that doesn't usually announce itself with significance. The sun didn't shine particularly bright. The sky didn't crack open with revelation. I simply walked into the lawyer's office. Calm, resolute, my hand steady, my heartbeat even. But inside that office, behind a closed door trimmed with dark cherry wood, everything came to a point. The property division that my siblings had been fighting over for nearly 2 years, 2 exhausting, humiliating years, was laid out in 37 stapled pages. I had been told that the feud would go on for months more. My lawyer had predicted depositions, accusations, courtroom scenes that would drain us all further. But I was done. Done watching them argue over our parents' legacy as if it were debris. Done listening to messages filled with threats disguised as concerns. Done playing referee between people far too old to behave so childishly. Done being the quiet one, the responsible one, the one expected to make peace while everyone else made demands. So when the lawyer slid the final transfer document toward me, the one that allowed me, and only me, to reroute the entire estate resolution, I didn't hesitate. It was a power they never should have handed me, but they did. Because I had been the executor. Because I had been the trustworthy one. Because I had always followed the rules. Except that morning. I took the pen. I placed the tip on the signature line. And I wrote my name. Not to take the money. Not to hoard property. Not to punish them in any cruel or extravagant way. But to end the battle they refused to walk away from. The $800,000 estate was settled in the only fair, documented, ethical way left. And none of them saw it coming. When the confirmation emails went out, when the transfers finalized from my own account, my siblings erupted. My phone filled with calls, messages, voice notes laced with outrage. They accused. They threatened. They demanded explanations. But I didn't answer. Because the truth, the full truth, began long before that morning. Long before greed sprouted in people I once trusted. Long before the inheritance became a weapon. It started years ago, with a family that looked whole from the outside. With a mother and father who believed their children would hold each other up someday. With old promises, old resentments, old wounds that never healed. If you want to know why I ended the war the way I did, you have to understand who I am. How I was raised. What I learned the hard way. And why, when pushed far enough, even a quiet woman in her 60s can become the most unshakable force in the room. But we'll get there. For now, picture the moment, the soft click of a pen, the signature that rewrote everything, the silence that followed. And understand, my name is Evelyn Marlowe, and I am 68 years old. I've lived a long enough life to understand that people reveal themselves most clearly when money enters the room. Or more accurately, when money leaves the room. I'm not a dramatic woman. Never have been. I raised 2 children, put in 34 dedicated years as a community librarian, nursed my husband through the worst of his illness, buried him with dignity, and tried to live quietly after that. Peacefully. Predictably. But life rarely grants peace to those who seek it. After my husband passed, I became the unofficial pillar of my extended family. I didn't ask for that role. It simply fell to me. I was the one who remembered birthdays. The one who organized holiday gatherings. The one who mediated arguments, soothed tensions, offered rides, sent care packages, watched nieces and nephews, and made sure everyone felt included. My siblings, Caroline, the eldest by 2 years, and Mitchell, the youngest by 6, used to tease me for being the glue. Evelyn will handle it, they'd say. Always with affection. At least in those early days. But as our parents aged, that sentence shifted in tone. Became expectation instead of gratitude. Became burden instead of praise. When our mother developed dementia, the caretaking fell to me. Not because I was the only sibling capable, but because I was the only one who couldn't bear to say no. Caroline sent money occasionally. Mitchell sent excuses frequently. And I, widowed, tired, already spread thin, did everything else. When our father passed unexpectedly 2 years later, the estate transferred fully into my mother's name, and I was named executor upon her death. At the time, it seemed a formality. My siblings agreed. You're the responsible one, they said. You're the fair one. And I believed them. Now, at 68, I know better. Fairness is rarely valued by people who want more than they deserve. Perhaps that's why, in the winter of last year, when my mother finally passed and the estate opened, I felt something inside me shift. A finality. A reckoning. A readiness to see things clearly, without sentiment. The inheritance was substantial. A home worth nearly $600,000, a lake cabin valued at $200,000, and a set of investment accounts that had grown impressively over the decades. My parents had always been responsible, careful savers. They intended for these assets to bind their children, not divide them. But the moment the numbers appeared on paper, I saw the change in my siblings' eyes. Caroline became sharp, impatient, calculating in ways that felt foreign to the sister who once braided my hair. Mitchell became resentful, accusatory, as if the years I spent caring for our mother were a personal attack on him. People think betrayal happens suddenly, in one blow. They imagine a dramatic reveal, a shouted accusation, a moment of impact. But betrayal is more like erosion. Slow, steady, devastating only when you finally look up and realize half the shoreline is gone. To understand the explosion, you have to see the cracks that formed long before it. Growing up, the three of us were tightly knit, at least in memory. Caroline was the rule follower. I was the quiet thinker. Mitchell was the charming troublemaker, the one who slid through life with ease because everyone liked him too much to hold him accountable. But adulthood has a way of reshaping people. Some grow, some calcify. Caroline married early, built stability, and became accustomed to control. She has always been the type to plan everything down to the color of the napkins. The kind who sees order as morality. She also possesses a subtle superiority she never admits, but always implies. Mitchell, on the other hand, stumbled from one job to another, collecting hobbies he couldn't afford while ignoring responsibilities he should have shouldered. His charisma aged poorly, turning from charm into defensiveness, from playfulness into avoidance. And me? I stayed in the middle. The mediator. The calm one. The bridge. But when our mother's health declined, those roles became magnified. Caroline controlled from afar with phone calls and instructions. Mitchell avoided entirely. And I became the caretaker by default. At first, I thought they appreciated it. Caroline sent thank you texts. Mitchell promised to make it up someday. But promises age like milk when they're never kept. Then came the will. My parents, in their old-fashioned fairness, had divided everything equally. 3 equal shares. To me, this made sense. I didn't expect more because I had cared more. Care is not a currency to be repaid. It is an act of love. But my siblings disagreed. Subtly at first. Then openly. Caroline believed she deserved a larger share because she had been the responsible one all her life. Her words. As if consistency earned inheritance points. Mitchell argued that since he struggled financially, it would be cruel not to adjust the numbers in his favor. He believed need should outweigh structure. He said I should understand that. It didn't matter to them that I had spent years cleaning wounds, mediating hallucinations, cooking meals, paying bills, losing sleep, rearranging my entire existence so that our mother could remain at home. To them, that was expected. And so, within a month of the estate opening, the negotiations turned into arguments. Then legal threats. Then full silence unless their attorneys were copied. I watched 2 people I once loved twist themselves into shapes I hardly recognized. They weaponized memory. They rewritten history. They dissected every detail of our parents' estate as if they were archaeologists searching for proof they deserved more. But the real fracture, the quiet, deliberate cut, came the day they both separately accused me of hiding assets. Imagine being told by blood that your integrity is suddenly negotiable. Imagine watching your family treat you like a suspect instead of a sister. That is when something inside me shifted. Something foundational. Something irreversible. It started with a missing account. Not missing, technically, just mysteriously withdrawn. My parents had a modest investment portfolio, mostly bonds and conservative stocks. It wasn't flashy, but it had grown steadily. One account, valued at nearly $75,000, was intended as an emergency fund for our mother's medical needs. I had access to it as her financial power of attorney during her illness. After her death, the balance should have transferred into the estate. But when the time came to account for it, the numbers didn't match. The balance wasn't zero, but it had been drained by nearly $30,000. Quietly, in small withdrawals spread over 2 years. And guess whose name appeared on the digital authorization logs? Mitchell's. He had accessed our mother's online accounts, guessed her password, one she reused far too often, and justified it under some warped theory that Mom would have wanted him to have help. When confronted, he didn't deny it. He called it a loan, a necessity, an advance on inheritance. My heart cracked that day, not because of the money, but because of the entitlement. Caroline's betrayal was different. Sharper. More calculated. She secured a private appraiser and attempted to have the lake cabin valued significantly lower than its market worth, so she could buy me and Mitchell out for pennies. She filed paperwork quietly, attempting to rush it through before the estate lawyer could review it. She may have succeeded, if the appraiser hadn't emailed the wrong Evelyn. He sent his undervalued report to me instead of her. And in that moment, everything crystallized. One sibling stealing in small, secret bites. The other manipulating numbers in broad daylight. Both convinced that I would be too soft, too naive, too forgiving to stop them. They were wrong. But the defining betrayal hadn't arrived yet. The moment that ended everything came during a mediation meeting, when Caroline, red-faced with indignation, slammed her hand on the table and said, "Evelyn, just step aside. You're too emotional to manage this. You were always the weakest of us." Weak. The word burned, seeped into my bones, settled somewhere deep. She didn't know it, but she had just written her own ending. Because I am many things, quiet, patient, deliberate, but weak is not one of them. I left the meeting. Calmly. Respectfully. Without raising my voice or showing the storm she had triggered. But I walked out with a decision forming, slow and powerful, like a tide preparing to rise. They wanted a fight. Instead, I would give them something far more devastating. The truth. Documented. Unshakable. Unavoidable. And an ending they would never forget. I began quietly. Revenge, ethical revenge, requires composure. Requires patience. Requires the discipline to move without broadcasting a single step. So I documented everything. Every withdrawal. Every timestamp. Every digital footprint Mitchell had left in those 2 years of siphoning funds. I contacted the bank's fraud department, not to accuse, but to request full historical logs for estate accounting purposes. Those logs arrived in a tidy PDF. 9 pages. Every transaction bearing a trail Mitchell couldn't erase. Then came Caroline's scheme. I pulled property records, appraisals, market reports. The cabin's true value wasn't ambiguous. It was public. It was recorded. And her attempt to undercut it by more than half wouldn't survive scrutiny. I also discovered something else. Her private appraiser had been disciplined 3 years earlier for undervaluing properties in divorce settlements. That didn't help her credibility. But the most important discovery wasn't financial. It was emotional. In digging through documents, I found our mother's handwritten letter, the one she had sealed with her will but never sent. It was addressed to me. Her words were soft, careful, filled with gratitude for my care. She apologized for placing so much burden on me. She explained why she chose me as executor. Not because I was the most responsible, but because she trusted me to act with integrity even when pressured. Reading her letter solidified my resolve. The next step was legal. I hired a new lawyer, one who specialized in estate disputes and forensic accounting. A quiet professional with meticulous habits and a reputation for being unshakable in court. She spent 6 weeks reviewing everything. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You have enough evidence to remove both of your siblings from any decision-making role, possibly even to sue." I nodded, but then I said something that surprised her. "I don't want to destroy them. I just want to end this." She leaned back. "Then you'll need a strategy that forces resolution without war." And that is exactly what we built. A plan so grounded in evidence, so transparently documented, that no judge could ignore it. A plan that would prevent any further manipulation. A plan that would protect my parents' legacy while cutting off every avenue my siblings used to twist it. The solution came in the form of a court-approved settlement restructuring. One that required a unanimous signature from all beneficiaries. But here's the quiet secret. As executor, I had the authority to initiate the restructuring before signatures were collected. Once initiated, the estate funds had to be consolidated temporarily into a holding account under my name, for legal processing only, before being distributed exactly according to the final agreement. My siblings fought that step, screamed, threatened lawsuits, but they couldn't stop it. The law didn't allow them to. Here's what they didn't realize. Once the funds were in my account temporarily, I held the final pen. The pen that could end everything. It happened on an evening in late spring. I had spent the day reviewing documents, answering my lawyer's questions, and preparing for yet another mediation that would almost certainly collapse into accusations. I sat at my kitchen table, the setting sun painting the room gold, feeling the weight of months pressing into my shoulders. My phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. I opened it. One sentence. Cold. Surgical. If you weren't so desperate for attention, none of this would be a problem. Not about the money. Not about the documents. Not about fairness or logic. No. About attention. As if the years I spent caring for our mother were a performance. As if my exhaustion had been theatrics. As if my grief was manipulation. Minutes later, a second message came from Mitchell. Stop dragging this out. Just sign what we want or we'll go after you for financial abuse. Financial abuse. Me, the woman who fed our mother by hand, who slept on a cot for months beside her bed, who gave up a career advancement to stay home and keep her safe. Something inside me, long dormant, rose with deliberate clarity. Not anger. Not vengeance. Resolve. I stood, poured myself a glass of water, and stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky shifting into evening blues. I watched a pair of sparrows dart between branches, moving with the effortless coordination my family had long since lost. I had tried to mediate, tried to reason, tried to preserve relationships. But there comes a moment when trying becomes enabling, a moment when silence becomes complicity, a moment when peace requires action. And so, with absolute steadiness, I made my decision. I would end the dispute, not through threats, not through retaliation, not through destruction, but through truth, through documentation, through ethical, undeniable action. The restructuring agreement, designed to finalize the estate with court protection, sat on my dining table, awaiting signatures. My lawyer had assured me that initiating the transfer would force my siblings' hand. Either they accepted the objective settlement, or they faced a judge armed with evidence of their misconduct. I walked inside, picked up the pen, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Not relief. Peace born of clarity, of understanding, of accepting that I could not save everyone, not even my own siblings, from themselves. I signed the initiation papers, and with that single signature, the process began. Within 48 hours, the estate assets, nearly $800,000 in property and investments, transitioned into the holding account under my name. Legally, temporarily, irrevocably, and my siblings, completely unaware of the implications, continued fighting as though they still held control. They didn't. I did. The first collapse was Mitchell's. When the court received my restructuring submission, the forensic accounting report accompanied it. Every withdrawal he made, every unauthorized transfer, every digital signature traced to his IP address. His lawyer called mine within hours. The threat tone disappeared, replaced by tight, hushed negotiation. They knew the truth. If the case went to court, Mitchell could be charged with misappropriation of funds from a vulnerable adult, a felony in our state. Instead of fighting, he folded. Agreed to the settlement. Signed immediately. Silent. Defeated. He didn't dare challenge the distribution because doing so would require bringing his theft into open court. Then came Caroline. Her downfall was quieter, but deeper. The appraisal scandal surfaced almost immediately. My lawyer submitted documentation of her appraiser's disciplinary record, along with market analyses showing the cabin's actual worth. Caroline's attempt to manipulate the numbers wasn't just unethical. It positioned her as a bad-faith negotiator. The judge reviewing our petition sent a written notice. Further attempts to alter property valuations outside approved channels will be considered intentional obstruction. Caroline's lawyer urged settlement. Caroline refused. For a week. Then she received a second notice. The court had approved the restructuring, and unless she agreed, a formal hearing would be scheduled, with full evidence review. 2 days later, she signed. Quietly. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a single, tense signature. And that was the end of the war. The estate finalized exactly according to our parents' wishes. 3 equal shares. Every dollar accounted for. Every property valued fairly. Every manipulation documented and neutralized. My siblings didn't congratulate me. They didn't thank me. They didn't speak to me at all. Instead, they retreated into the silence created by their own actions. Their downfall wasn't dramatic. No scenes. No shouting. No public humiliation. It was simply this. They lost their power. The power of accusation. The power of manipulation. The power to twist my silence into weakness. And they knew it. The day the final confirmation letters arrived, stating that all transfers were complete and the estate had been lawfully closed, I received one final message from Caroline. Not anger. Not apology. Just 4 words. You've changed, Evelyn. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I realized the truth. I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped bending. The house felt still after everything ended. Not empty, just still in a way I hadn't felt in years. A kind of quiet that wasn't lonely, but restorative. The settlement had closed. The assets had transferred. The war was over. But the emotional debris remained. Grief doesn't vanish just because justice prevails. For weeks afterward, I went through a strange period of rebalancing. I slept more, ate slowly, took long walks, allowed my body to unclench from months of tension. It surprised me how much guilt surfaced, not for what I had done, but for what I hadn't been able to save. Families like ours aren't supposed to fracture. Siblings aren't supposed to become adversaries. But the truth is softer and harsher at the same time. People make their own choices, and sometimes those choices lead them away from you. One afternoon, as I sorted through boxes of my mother's belongings, I found an old photograph. The 3 of us, Caroline holding my hand, Mitchell leaning on my shoulder, smiling in the sunshine of a childhood that now felt like mythology. I looked at that picture for a long time, not with sadness, with acceptance. I cannot control how they grew. I cannot undo their decisions. And I cannot carry the weight of their resentment anymore. The healing came slowly, in the return of my appetite, in the softness of mornings without dread, in the reawakening of hobbies abandoned during years of caregiving. I joined a local book club, planted tomatoes, allowed myself to take naps in the middle of the day, little luxuries that had felt forbidden when I lived under the pressure of others' expectations. My children visited more. They knew the broad strokes of what happened, though not the details. They hugged me tightly one evening and said, "Mom, we're proud of you." I realized then how rarely I had allowed myself to feel pride. Not arrogance, not triumph, just quiet, grounded pride in having held my integrity through a storm. The silence from my siblings persists. And oddly, that silence feels like release. A closing chapter rather than a wound. They will have to face themselves someday. I already have. If there is one lesson I carry from all of this, it is simple. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not submission. And integrity, when pushed far enough, becomes its own form of power. People often mistake the calm ones for fragile. They assume gentleness means vulnerability. They assume the quiet will always yield. But quiet people are observers. We see everything. We remember everything. And when we finally act, it is not impulsive. It is decisive. My siblings were not villains. They were merely people twisted by fear, by entitlement, by the belief that money can compensate for insecurity. Their downfall was not something I celebrated. It was simply necessary. Ethical revenge is not destruction. It is illumination. You document. You clarify. You reveal the truth so completely that deception has nowhere left to hide. And when the truth stands bare, people unravel or rise based on who they truly are, not who they pretend to be. I ended the war not through anger, but through evidence. Through the quiet courage to follow the path my parents trusted me to walk. And through the understanding that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is stop shielding people from the consequences of their own decisions. If you are listening to this and you find yourself in a similar place, torn between loyalty and justice, between peacekeeping and self-respect, hear this clearly. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to protect what is right. You are allowed to end a fight that others insist on prolonging. Strength is not loud. Strength is steady. Sometimes it looks like decades of quiet caregiving. Sometimes it looks like a single signature on a Thursday morning. And sometimes it looks like walking away from people who once defined you, choosing instead the peace you've earned. As for me, my life is calmer now. My home is light again. My heart is steady. And every time I hear the soft click of a pen, I am reminded. Sometimes the smallest sound can end the longest war.